This is my Gran's place, in case you were wondering. Well, the attic anyway. The rest of the house is spotless, as you'd expect. The only evidence of a life's work. I bet she'd be up here dusting and polishing if she could make it up the ladder. God, she probably shudders when she thinks about what it's like up here. Perhaps that's how attics got their dodgy reputation, you know, for being a bit on the creepy side, sort of where there's shit, there's evil. It's like a refuge for me up here. I feel like I'm sitting in the front window of a furniture shop downstairs. It's so bloody neat and tidy. Now that's what I call creepy. Still, I shouldn't knock it. It's got me out of trouble for the time being. Or my mum wouldn't have taken me in. It's not that she doesn't like me, you understand. No, it's just that I had blue hair at the time and it clashed with her curtains. I love old things. I had a stall down the market at one time. I had to get rid of so much stuff when me and Albie were evicted and split up. Still, I suppose it saved any arguments about who was going to have what. Oh, I mustn't forget that appointment. Not that I'll get anything out of it, of course, but my little visits do ease a few consciences down at the job centre. My mum hates what she calls clutter. She seems set on destroying any evidence of that slow climb from poverty to respectability.
Since we shall probably never meet or correspond again, I should like to relate some events which led to my share in your life. As my daughter, you should know I was born outside London shortly before my mother's death. My father quickly remarried, the widow of his partner in a pianoforte business, and I grew up surrounded by brothers and sisters. Being poor, we lived on meals of potatoes and onions. At the age of 10, I left school to work in a linen draper's shop. Of office work I had none, but ran articles to the London Bridge rail station. I manoeuvred furniture carts through blocks of traffic on King William Street, and was always careful to keep the wooden handles of that two-wheeled contraption well down, to prevent its tipping the contents into the street and elevating my light body into the air. Sometimes I delivered mercantile papers, and on Saturday it was for me to save post by depositing mail in the post office before the last stroke of 6.
Okay, so I muddled up London Bridge and Tower Bridge and ended up here. Apparently this American multimillionaire made the same mistake when he was buying London Bridge. So do the stupid get rich or the rich get stupid? It doesn't sound as though great-great-granddaddy Freddie was getting rich, but then he was never short of a job or two. Perhaps I should have left school at 10. This old wharf would have been a busy place in his day. He probably worked round here if he was delivering shipping papers. I suppose he was sort of a Victorian version of a dispatch rider. Freddie really doesn't fit my image of a Victorian man, but then I tend to see history as stuffed dummies in museums. It must have been growing up with all those TV versions of Dickens. You know, the sets look real, the costumes look real, but the characters are cardboard cutouts. I think they're based on the people in those posy old photographs we used to sell on the stall. Sunday best snaps, we used to call them.
I dodged up Fenchurch and Lombard Streets, then from Cheapside to Wood Street, through a series of small alleys and courts, to the back entrance where other clerks stood with arms twined around great bundles which just admitted their fingers being interlocked. On the foot passage in Cheapside, a stout lady went down with a grunt, which caused the gentleman behind her to stagger for footing, and I was alarmed at the prospect of being stopped. I gathered my papers in close embrace and sprang past them into the roadway. Already I had run 3/4 of a mile and my legs trembled, but I do so hate giving up on anything, as perhaps you have heard.
Talk about trembling legs. Following in Frederick's footsteps was a bit like taking up jogging. Still, it seemed like it was a day for having trouble with your legs. Stan reckoned he'd been busking for 18 years and he'd managed to walk down the steps of St. Paul's every day without falling on top of anyone before. I kidded him that he probably said that to all the girls, and he actually blushed. Of course, that woman's problem was less to do with her legs and more to do with her trying to rush hour in non-rushable shoes.
A few yards from the post, the clock began to chime, and the hundreds crowding the thoroughfare redoubled their efforts, I along with the rest. I sprinted up the steps and threw my sack over the heads of the waiting mob with bundles on their shoulders. It flew through the open window, into the receiving room seconds before the gate shut down with a bang. I had made it, and still remember the satisfaction in that. But this life was a drudgery. These strangers squeezed all they could from me. 10 minutes were allowed for meals of half-cooked meat oozing with blood and much fat. I slept in a turned-down bedstead in the back of the shop where foul air emitted from the gas burners. My father died at the end of my 14th year, and a second cousin took control of the pianoforte concern. When he offered me an apprenticeship, I gladly accepted.
Well, you'd be all right there, Freddie. Pianos then were like videos now. Everyone wanted one. I saw my first colour TV in this house. Grandad loved technology. He had to be the first with everything. I remember this tape recorder. It was the first time any of us had heard ourselves. It was so funny. My dad trying to sound intelligent by reciting bits out of the Reader's Digest, and my mum talking in her telephone voice all the time. Oh well. Out of the past and into the present. I wonder what they're going to offer me this time. Better not be another bloody sweatshop, having to be polite to that slimy creep. I was so angry when I came out. Oh, I still feel bad about that boy.
I started at 4 shillings a week with this cousin, who turned out to be a hard master. Although he earned high esteem from my family and church, he worked the staff long hours and expected me to inform him of office activities during his absence. When I refused to do this, he complained to my mother, and soon my life at home became as miserable as my life at work. I never spoke, except from necessity, and spent my time reading and imagining life away from that place.
So Frederick liked to lose himself in books, huh? Perhaps that's why I found him in one. Libraries are good places if you're unemployed. They offer so much. A different set of four walls. They're warm in winter, cool in summer. You can get any newspaper or magazine. You meet a better class of vagrant. And then, of course, there's 1,000,001 ways to divert your mind from its normal psychotic course. Mind you, knowledge for knowledge's sake can become a little tedious. Well, I know I said I liked old things, but second and third-hand experiences. Need I say more?
Each day I ate my lunch of bread and butter next to the pump in St. Dunster's churchyard, and then wandered down to the river to watch the activity as the ship's crewmen broke for midday. The rest of the pianoforte staff were better off than I, and took their lunch at Rodney's coffee house, where a penny could buy a half pint, along with the privilege of sitting down and eating their prepared lunches at wooden tables. Yet I would not have traded my place by the river for that. One day I returned late, having fallen asleep on the embankment. Reproved for this, I told my cousin it was no wonder. I had little interest in making money, it bored me. I was sent home with the message I was useless, and a day later had the pleasure of seeing my indentures burned at a gas flame in front of it. My lunches on the river had made me determined to go to sea, and soon I was aboard the Crocodile, a wooden frigate lying off the Tower of London. I happily served this position for 4 years. when I had to enter sickbay with an infected ankle, made worse by the salt water and the necessity of sometimes wading knee-deep in coal dust, searching out large pieces for the galley stoves. A mustard poultice was applied, but the sore never healed. Your Uncle George was kind enough to buy my release, and I recovered while working as a printer's devil in his shop.
It really comes over strong, doesn't it? You know, blood being thicker than water and all that. It's like there was always another family business waiting to pluck Freddie from the jaws of despair. I wonder if it was the women that persuaded their husbands to give Freddie a break. I mean, let's face it, the men sound like a bunch of real bastards. Well, not real bastards, of course, because then they would be like my kid, wouldn't they? Not family at all, really. Certain members of my family are responsible for having me evicted from the squat where I was living, for having my kid put into care, and for having Albie, that's the kid's dad, nicked for possession. And why did they do it? Because they care about me so much.
It was during this time that I met and married your mother, lacking 2 months of my 19th year. We owned a small house and garden, and your brother Arthur was born after a reduction in shop work left me unemployed. When it became apparent that more printing work was not forthcoming, I left London, after selling the feather bed to get money to buy tools. Shortly after this, your mother wrote that little Arthur had died. I was greatly saddened by the loss. Alone in the city, I thought back to that noble little fellow who attracted attention even from strangers. His right-hand forefinger was fatter than any of the others, I remember.
It's weird what kids do to your sense of time. I feel like I've sort of sleptwalked through life since I took her into care. And of course every day seems the same when you're on the dole, so time really drags. Everything just drifts in slow motion. But when I saw her, I couldn't believe that there'd been time for that baby to become that little girl. I thought perhaps I'd got the wrong address. But you know, it must be 4 years ago that me and Albie had that stall down the market. I remember the day I told him I was pregnant. First he didn't want me to carry anything, and then he virtually force-fed me with food and hot drinks. I think he liked the idea of being a parent and his own boss, but in a way there were two things he needed himself, and I didn't want to be either of them. But they were good times, at the time.
I began earning 15 shillings a week tuning pianos, and sent for your mother, who made our rooms in London as comfortable as possible. I carved furniture with my tools, bought fabrics and such for the house when my pay went up to 20 shillings. I liked such work. There was a reality in it which interested me. It was about this time that your sister Lizzie was born. She was a sweet, fat baby with a finely proportioned head. We were constant companions, and travelled to Hampstead Heath each Saturday to collect buttercups and other wild flowers. After our move to Kentish Town, we took advantage of its closeness to Camberwell to visit her grandmother. Once Lizzie went to a party dressed in white, with a wreath on her head. She wore kid gloves, fastened at the wrist with a pearl button, and carried a camellia carefully, as if afraid of bruising the flower. I give your mother complete credit for dressing the child, who, in spite of my disagreements with her, always managed to keep you children neat in the midst of poverty. I called for Lizzie in a cab, and tired from the party, she fell asleep with her arms around my neck and her face pressed against the shoulders of my serge overcoat. Oh, it may appear weak of me to dwell on these details, but I've so little of that nature to recall that they become doubly precious. For it was after this party that Lizzie became ill. She was put to bed on returning home and remained there until her death 2 weeks later. Once again the small grave in Plumstead churchyard was opened, and I viewed Arthur's white coffin next to Lizzie's. I had no tears for the meaningless funeral service, and was much criticized by her mother's family. They went so far as to blame my atheist and vegetarian beliefs, since I had refused to let the child eat flesh. This did not drive your mother and I closer, and soon after the funeral she left with our new infant, Florence.
For a long time I thought it was one thing that had made me decide to split with Albie, but it was actually a lot of things. He seemed to represent everything that was bad about my life and not enough that was good. I know what happened would have happened, Albie or no Albie, but the way he handled it was all wrong. Instead of me being part of something that was happening to my baby, I ended up more like a witness. My split with Albie was total. No phone calls, no letters, no desperate apologies, no let's still be friends. And what with London being such a good place to get lost in, no bumping into each other. Well, not until a couple of weeks ago anyway. I'd been in a big CND march and having brushed shoulders with about 100,000 people, might have expected to meet up with someone like Albie, but I didn't. I had to dash off for an interview at the Tate Gallery of all places, and that's where I saw him, still trying to make a bob or two out of the cultured classes.
The parting of a man and woman, the terms husband and wife are detestable to me, is always a serious step. They never feel the same after. I remember walking the narrow streets near Westminster Abbey for 3 or 4 hours before I could induce your mother to adopt my system of diet, a compliance I felt necessary before I could resume my relationship with her. Finally she complied, but it was 7 weeks before she joined me, a delay which cost our reunion much of its interest. Nothing can thrive in an atmosphere of indifference. We lived as equal partners for 7 years and never quarrelled, but try as we did, we could never establish a common sympathy between us. So for many reasons, I gave up a good position and brought you and Florence to the United States. Small Harry remained in England with your mother. I promised to send the money as soon as I was able.
You were past climbing up ladders.
Well, you know, Vicky, us Oldens, we've got to keep in practice for that last long climb upstairs.
Poor old thing. Are you sure they're going to keep a place for you up there, then?
I think I deserve an interview at least. And I always keep appointments, not like some people I know.
No, I've forgotten. I'm on my way. Still, I reckon I stand more chance of getting a place in heaven, sins and all, and getting a job out of that lot. And talking of heaven, thought our family didn't go in for all of this religious stuff.
What have you got there?
I've been checking out the ancestors. Old Frederick here.
My grandfather.
Yeah, bit of a rebel, wasn't he, what? Vegetarian, atheist, into free love.
He had his good points, and I think he was quite keen in being remembered by them. A free thinker, that's what he thought he was.
So you don't think he made the grade, huh?
No, he was a free thinker, but, unfortunately, he wasn't quite so generous when it came to other people's thoughts. And he led his poor wife and kids such a right song and dance.
That's the conclusion I came to. Still. So basically, there's not a grain of truth in this.
Oh, there's a grain of truth. A large pinch of salt. I'm sure this is exactly how he remembers it.
It's his story and he tells it well.
Well, exactly. Well, if you'd heard all the stories my old mum used to tell, like the one when she and Aunt Flo, they ran away from him in America because they wanted to get back here to be with their mum. Oh, he was mad. He did everything to get them back. Went to court. He never did forgive my mum.
I don't suppose his wife or your mum ever kept a diary or anything like that, did they?
No. No, I don't think so.